Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. For come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. I'm Ace Edwards, right alongside
Connor Gontazor.
And the only thing left to do after a bad loss is get back on the horse and try to go again next week. But before we give the scouting report for the Cincinnati Bearcats, we do want to thank the sponsors of the show, and that is Greg, Arthur, and Grandma. Thank you, Grandma. And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out both the official supporters link and the merch store link in our podcast and Twitter bios. But let's just dive straight in to the Cincinnati Bearcats, who I made a mistake in the Arizona State recap, or maybe it was just talking afterwards. I made the mistake of saying that Cincinnati was bowl eligible under Scott Satterfield. They are one win away from doing so, which does scare me because there's nothing that terrifies me more than a Scott Satterfield team that is fighting for bowl eligibility.
Yeah, there is no one that loves 6-6 more than Scott Satterfield. And granted, doesn't have to beat us to get there, but
True.
It would
beat TCU instead.
Yeah. So, who's to say which is a easier task right now?
Yeah, but they are 5-5 going into this game, but they started off pretty hot to begin the season, or at least the conference slate, mollywopping Houston, losing to Tech by 3, and then scraping by UCF and Arizona State. But recently they've been on a bit of a skid, losing and giving up 30 points at minimum up against Colorado, West Virginia, and Iowa State. And Iowa State isn't exactly the pinnacle of offense. So, and while their offense isn't bad, they're just kind of okay. They're definitely missing their offensive coordinator from last year. But this is one of those times that we said this up against Houston, and I believed it then. I believe this. I think that in terms of pure talent, this Cincinnati Bearcats team is more talented than a 5-5 record as it stands right now. And that's the overarching thought. But Connor, if you want to give any overarching thoughts before we get into the offensive schemes, by all means.
Well, this is a game where something has to give. Cinci is on a 3-game losing streak, and K-State is on its first losing streak since 2021. So this is a game where, at least to the best of my knowledge, someone has to win. And so there will be a losing streak ending with this game, whether it's K-State's or Cincinnati's.
I hope it's K-State's. Anyway, offensive scheme time.
Yep. So Cincinnati is an offense that first and foremost is focused on being very efficient and spreading the ball around to as many different players as possible. They're perhaps the team that uses RPOs the most in the Big 12. And because of that, they will happily dink and dunk teams to death if permitted. Hello, Wunkus.
Yeah, that is Wunkus, and that is my hats that are all falling down. But to sort of give the TLDR of what the rest of this scouting report is going to be, it reminds me a lot of the early Neil Brown West Virginia teams, except for with a worse defense, where they still have about the same talent level, but I feel like Cincinnati just does a few schematic things differently. But they do run that really hyper efficient short passing offense based on a lot of RPOs, and that is the identity of this Cincinnati team on offense, is those short efficient passes where you just go click, 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 and then just take what you can get at pretty much any time.
Yeah, and that plays out. Sorsby's average per attempt is 7.8 yards. Brendan Sorsby, the starting QB, but and he's also got a fairly decent completion percentage of 65.5%, which isn't setting the world on fire. But this is a fairly young Brendan Sorsby, as well as I believe his first year.
It's his first year starting, yeah.
And that's a 8% increase in completion percentage from last year at Indiana. So nothing else has made him a lot more efficient. But we can keep going on the offensive scheming here. They're mostly an 11 personnel spread team that uses wide splits in order to create a bunch of space for not only the receivers, but for the running game as well.
Yeah, it's the veer and shoot offense, though a bit of an offshoot of it. It's not the true veer and shoot that we see at Tennessee and we saw it like early 2010s Baylor, but it is very much using the same principles of really wide splits, RPO a team till they die, and then just hope for the best afterwards, which the upside of that scheme is it's very good at generating explosive plays. The downside of that scheme is it's not very good in the red zone, which we will talk about later.
Yep, and as mentioned before, they're a heavy RPO team. So even though they're running the ball just a little over half the time, 52% of the time, the vast majority of those are just giving the ball off on an RPO read.
Yeah, and there's not much to say there. That's just what they do.
Yeah, but despite their efficiency, they're a slightly below average scoring offense statistically, scoring about 27.4 points per game, which is only about 75th in the nation. So a little below average there. And they are, though, however, above average at converting third downs at 43%, which is 46th in the nation. And again, it's their efficiency and ability to stay on schedule that allows them to have such a high percentage on third downs.
Yeah, and that's the big advantage of the veer and shoot is it's really, really good between the 20s, but as you're about to read off, Connor, it has a bit of a deficiency, one might say, in the red zone.
Yeah, they are not very good in the red zone. They're only scoring 80% of the time, and they're only scoring touchdowns on 55% of their possessions on plenty of opportunities down there. And that's 101st in the nation. So really, really poor down there.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because it isn't really an offensive line thing, which is very strange because I think their offensive line is actually generally quite solid. So they theoretically could power in a lot more touchdowns if they were willing to compress their sets. And it is very strange that Satterfield has more or less, I don't want to say completely abandoned, but mostly abandoned the triple option system that he had while he was running at Louisville, which was one of my favorite offensive systems in the country. So I'll admit that I'm a little sad about that, but it's not that they don't have the offensive line to sort of, ground and pound in the red zone. They just choose not to. They prefer to keep the defense spread out, which again, philosophically is fine, but it's just not working out for them in the red zone. And a lot of that is because their running game is very much a one-trick pony.
Yeah, in the running game, they're nearly exclusively a zone running team. And again, that's mostly because it's much easier to be a zone team when you're running an RPO-based offense. The only time they really rely on gap schemes is the occasional QB counter or power.
Yeah, and Brendan Sorsby, we'll talk about him later, but he's not overly mobile. He's a lot like Sam Levitt in terms of his mobility and his ability to run the offense. It's just a very different type of offense that requires a very different skill set, but still generally gets the same result. Yeah, so Cincinnati has run a gap scheme 76 times. 20 of those times have been on design quarterback powers or quarterback counters. So if they're running any sort of gap scheme, there's a very, very high statistical chance that the quarterback is the one keeping the ball, even if it is in their RPO package, which in the passing game, it's just the RPO game. It's just RPOs.
Yeah, and speaking of the passing game, they run play action about 40% of the time, and they focus predominantly on the middle of the field. So, in a traditional RPO offense, a lot of slants, a lot of mesh, and a lot of digs.
Yeah. And they sort of have, I don't want to say the perfect quarterback to run that offense, but they have a really, really good one to run this specific style of offense, and that is Brendan Sorsby, which, Connor, you have the initial notes about Sorsby.
Yeah, he's somebody that we've already been talking about quite a bit. And some of that's because he had a really great start to this season. However, despite that really good start that he had this year, he has cooled off a bit as of late. In particular, starting with the UCF game where he threw 2 interceptions. Since then, he's only had 3 touchdowns to 2 picks, and then also his completion percentage has gone down a fairly decent amount as well. But on top of that, he's still a quarterback that is good at taking care of the football, but that's just most of the time. His turnovers come in bunches, and when he's forced to be off schedule or off platform, a big part of that is his skill set of a quick release and ability to make pre-snap decisions. So when he's able to just operate in the quick game, he's one of the top quarterbacks in the conference. But outside of being able to make very quick reads and be almost robotic, he's just a little bit above average as a QB, which isn't too unusual, I suppose, for a young quarterback, where if you get them off rhythm and out of system, then they have a pretty sharp decline.
Yeah, which it's sort of the anti-Avery Johnson, but for the same reason, where Brendan Sorsby is very good at playing brain off football when he can just take one look at the picture and then make a snap decision immediately afterwards, which is why he's almost never sacked either. He just gets rid of the football. His average time to throw is about 2.8 seconds, which is including the occasional deep shot. So on any given pass, you're probably only going to get about 2.5 seconds, which just speaks to his pre-snap processing. And he just doesn't do well thinking afterwards, whereas Avery Johnson plays a lot better outside of structure. So it's a very different type of brain off football, but it's still brain off football. But if you would have asked me about Brendan Sorsby pretty much even up to the UCF game, I would have said that he was a dark horse candidate to be either honorable mention or second team all Big 12 quarterback. And then the Colorado West Virginia games happened where he looked abysmal in both, to say it kindly. He looked really, really bad in both of those games and then looked okay up against Iowa State. So we've seen a version of Brendan Sorsby that is really, really efficient and a really, really good quarterback. But we've also seen the Brendan Sorsby that just can't get out of his own way, which, again, that's a young quarterback trait. But it really is fascinating, the sort of duality that Brendan Sorsby has as a quarterback. But you pair that quarterback with a really consistent running back, and it can mitigate issues to an extent. And they definitely have a pretty solid one-line back, at least.
Yeah, and that back is Corey Kiner. He grades out to be one of the best running backs in the conference, and the main reason for that is his ability to not only absorb contact, but to force weak contact with his vision and his ability to throttle down before immediately lowering his shoulder to gain some extra yards. He's projected to be a day 3 draft pick, largely because he's such a consistent runner, even though he is a little low on touchdowns. He's only got 3 this season, but averaging 5.4 a carry and is approaching 1,000 yards. He's 97 yards away from 1,000 right now, so almost certainly will be a 1,000-yard rusher by the end of the year.
Yeah, he's just the model of consistency at the running back position. He's not Cam Scatterbo, but he has a very similar style. I would say that the running backs that sort of share that same style of vision, contact balance back, who just kind of has okay to good long speed would be Scattaboo, DJ Giddens, Corey Kiner. You might be able to shove Taj Brooks into that, though he has a lot more wiggle than all the other three backs. But I really like Corey Kiner as a back. It's almost like K-State doesn't really get a week off from going up against really solid running backs. And I think it's just talking about the sneaky depth that the Big 12 has at the running back position, which again, going off of conference stereotypes, it isn't really the conference that you'd expect for that. But I don't know, every single big media stereotype about the Big 12 has been out of date for about a decade now. So, but sort of complementing the running game is, what's a good running game without a good interior offensive line? And they have a really, really good, at least one piece of a really, really good interior.
Yeah, and that guy is Luke Kandra, who lines up at guard for them. He's a projected day 2 pick, and he might be the best pass blocking guard in the entire conference, right alongside the interior line that we saw last week against Arizona State. He's a bit above average in the run blocking game, but has a really great ability to just keep his hands locked onto a pass rusher's frame and is very good at stonewalling interior pressure.
Yeah, he's going to get his hands on you, and if he's able to do that, the rep is over. And he does it without holding, because he actually has enough lateral quickness to keep his hands in front of him as well. He honestly probably wouldn't be too bad as a tackle, but he's a really, really, really good guard. And I wish that there was more to say, but there's not. He's just a really, really good interior offensive lineman. And it's a lot easier to point out flaws for interior guys than it is to point out strengths. And he just doesn't have many flaws, which is probably the best compliment that I could give him. But there's one more big piece to the offense who, I'm not going to lie to you, he does scare me quite a bit. And that's because he's a really tall tight end who has one stat in particular in a spread system that just should not happen.
Yeah, it's Joe Royer. He's a tight end in a spread system who somehow manages to be second on the team in catches, which is really surprising. And he's also second on the team in receiving yards to go with that. You can make a very convincing argument that he is their best home run guy, not necessarily because of his speed, but because he's so difficult to bring down. But he does still bring speed to his game as well. But it is his toughness and his size that really adds to the picture for him.
Yeah, he's 6'5", 250, which he should not move the way he does at that size. He reminds me, this is going to be a deep pull, he reminds me of Cole Turner, the tight end for Nevada that we played a few years ago, except for he's a better inline blocker, which that was the only weakness to Cole Turner's game, was that man simply was not an inline tight end. Joe Royer, while run blocking isn't necessarily his forte, he is capable as a run blocking tight end, and he also has that ability to be a threat in the passing game. So Joe Royer, I'm trying to run through all of the tight ends in the conference, and I'm struggling to think of one that I could say without any bias is better than Joe Royer. Garrett Oakley, if he was healthy this year, could have made a pretty convincing argument for it, but I just don't think that there is another guy sort of on Joe Royer's level in the Big 12 right now at tight end.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add on that, but I do think it is really interesting that he's kind of flown under the radar, I think, because I've not really heard too much about him outside of Cincinnati spheres this season. But really, statistically, he's been very effective this season, but hasn't really made much of a splash in terms of name recognition.
Yeah, which I mean, that sort of happens when you're playing for, at the time, a 500 team. I mean, we know who Garrett Oakley is because we are Garrett Oakley enjoyers as fans of K-State, but I mean, not a lot of people are going to know the name of their specific tight end unless he's really, really good outside of that circle. But my biggest takeaway from the offense is it's so efficient because they do have a lot of guys that are more than capable of making plays within the structure of the offense. And I know that we sort of, looked at Brendan Sorsby and not necessarily said that he can't throw deep, because he does have an all right deep ball. It's not great. It's not even really good. It's just kind of fine as far as deep balls go. But it really is focused on being really efficient in the offense, trying not to give the ball away. So it is a blend of the West Virginia philosophies of years past and sort of the Arizona State philosophy of a lot of play action passes and just trying to get guys out of position by clearing out the middle of the field, which, I mean, if K-State just sort of takes the game plan from the second half of the Arizona State game, they'll probably be all right, although it is a different type of running game that they're having to deal with. So all right, Wonkus is attacking my webcam at current moment, which she's a rascal, that one. But Connor, do you have any thoughts about the offense? That is my finger. Do you have any thoughts about the offense before we move on to the defensive side of the ball? All right, Wonk. Gonna have to edit that out. All right, so now we can talk about the defensive side of the ball, which is definitely it's definitely an interesting little setup they have on that side of the ball.
Yeah, they run the same 3-3 stack system that Iowa State does. In fact, you can make a convincing argument that Cincinnati under Luke Fickell was the team that popularized the 3-3 stack that a lot of teams in the Big 12 just so happened to adopt.
Yeah, so you're really going back to at least the school source that started it all. And I know technically Fickell isn't the originator, but he's the one that sort of perfected the craft and made it much, much better. So they stuck with that 3-3 stack system, which we're going to see a 3-3 stack for 2 weeks in a row going up against Cincinnati and Iowa State. So yippee for that, I guess. But they're also pretty similar in how they structure their run fits and how they send extra pressure as well.
Yeah, they're more than content to just 3 on a lot of downs, but they bring an occasional looping blitzer sent in on pure passing situations. Their sack leader is a linebacker who just so happens to be a very good blitzer. But again, a lot of downs. They're totally fine just running coverage.
Yeah, and it works out fine for them. And their leading sack getter is actually an old friend from a team that we've already mentioned, but that's a little bit down the road. But you can talk about both of all of their rate stats as well, because I think that if someone is going to get a look at this offense, this is definitely this defense. This is definitely not a defense where the stats are lying to you.
Yeah, they're a touch below average on third down conversion rates at 40%. They're only one spot below KU there, but they are above average at generating negative plays. A total of 60 tackles for loss this season, and averaging 6 negative plays a game. But where they shine the most is in the red zone, at least in terms of their touchdown percentage. They've only had 29 red zone opportunities the entire year, and they technically rank at 107th because 90% of them ended scores. They're only giving up touchdown 52% of the time, which is why they're a well above average scoring defense at 58th. And so while this team isn't the best at generating turnovers, they are very good at keeping teams out of the red zone. and the end zone whenever they get to the red zone by getting teams behind the sticks and off schedule, mostly through very short gains and the occasional tackle for loss or sack.
Yeah, and that is basically the story of this defense is their interior guys in the 3 down front that they play. You have one legitimate athletic monster who should not exist, and then 2 tree stumps who simply refuse to move. And then the linebackers just clean everything up for no gain or tackles for loss because they're really, really athletic. And then the defensive backs are solid enough to hang in coverage against pretty much anyone as well. So again, individual pieces of this defense are really, really good. It's a defense that you almost sort of have to out scheme or out talent. You have to do one or the other. If you try to do a mixture of both, that is arguably when they're going to be the most punishing as a defensive unit, which it's not exactly the easiest to out talent them given the 3 players that we're about to mention. And we're going to mention 3, but there are a bunch of honorable mentions that we could talk about as well.
Yeah, we'll start with the biggest one, literally and figuratively. Dante Corleone at nose tackle, which he's sometimes called the Godfather, and he's probably the best true nose tackle in the conference. He's an absolute athletic monster who can squat 600 pounds, bench 400 pounds, and still run a 4.7 40-yard dash at 6'1", 320 pounds. So he's just an absolutely just athletic monster.
He shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
That shouldn't exist. That shouldn't happen.
And he is remarkably gifted when it comes to this athleticism. And he's someone who generates a lot of pressure just by virtue of pushing centers into the laps of the quarterback and letting others clean up his mess. So he's a lot like Siaki Ika if Ika was way faster.
Yeah, because Siaki Ika, I think, ran like a 5.4 or like a 5.3.
That is what you would expect for a 300-plus pound nose tackle, not a 4.7.
Yeah, Dante Corleone genuinely scares me, and he probably will be the first-team All-Big 12 pick at nose tackle. And I really don't even think that it should be particularly close because he genuinely is on another level from everyone else. I think he's 2nd or 3rd on the team in sacks as a nose tackle, which he's 3rd. He has 3.5 compared to 4 for a defensive end and 7.5 for a linebacker, which we're going to talk about later. But getting 3.5 sacks as a nose tackle who plays a true 0 and getting as much pressure as he does by simply depositing the center in the lap of the quarterback. I know that this is almost certainly an older player catching a stray, but I feel a lot better about Sam Hecht taking care of Dante Corleone than I did with Hayden Gillum or Noah Johnson. And I still don't feel that great about Sam Hecht going up against Corleone.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to that either, but my eyes are definitely going to be on that matchup in the interior.
God, if we run inside zone more than like twice in a row, I may genuinely crash out in the stadium.
Yeah, that I'm hoping that is mostly stricken from the playbook this upcoming weekend. I'm hoping for lots and lots and lots of outside runs, but for the very least, off tackle. But we can move on to the next notable player here, and that's another linebacker in Jake Golday, one of the best coverage linebackers in the conference, who has great athleticism and coverage instinct, one who plays linebacker. And he also has the size to meet guys in the running game and is really consistent at wrapping up and getting really strong tackles. So he's kind of a jack of all trades linebacker, but it's impressive, especially because he's doing it at 6'4", 240. So a really quality athlete there in the second level for Cinci.
Yeah, the comp that I would have for Gold A is probably Tyron Hopper from the Mizzou games a few years ago, just because that really hyper athletic frame coverage linebacker who basically will come up as a missile in the running game and just will get that consistent wrap up tackle. So all of their linebackers are really, really athletic. I just like Gold A most in coverage. But there's one more linebacker to mention, and he is, for all intents and purposes, their Austin Romaine. He's not as good as Austin Romaine, but he is their Austin Romaine.
Yeah, and this was the guy that we were talking about earlier as being an old friend, and that's Jared Bartlett, a linebacker. He is originally from West Virginia, and he still has much of the same style that he did back when he was playing for Neil Brown. That's a player who's very good at playing downhill and racking up tackles, and is weirdly creative when he's sent on the blitz, but he can at times get himself into trouble by being a little bit too aggressive. But he is also the player that we were referring to as being a great blitzer. He leads since he was 7.5 sacks this season as a linebacker. So pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, and we mentioned all of those guys. There are other guys that just barely missed making the cut, like Antoine Peak Jr. at safety, who's graded out as one of the best run defenders, not only at safety, but in the entire conference at 92.2. You have Jordan Robinson at corner, who's a really, really good run defender. You have another run defending linebacker in Simeon Coleman. You have a lot of really, really talented pieces on this Cincinnati defense that, they can make life a handful for any offense. And I think that just as well leads us into the things that we're going to be watching going into this game. And I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not feeling great. I'm not feeling that great going into this game. I'm not feeling bad enough to genuinely predict a loss, but this is one of those times that I think it's a genuine coin flip. And yes, it is entirely off of the atrocious vibes of the previous week.
Yeah. I can't really disagree with that. And I honestly, I still haven't decided if I'm going to predict a win or a loss for this game. I've been going back and forth, but I'm trying to decide how much of it is rational, how much of it is just a horrible, horrible taste in my mouth from the events of the last few weeks. But as for what I'm going to be keeping my eyes on in this game, I think the biggest thing I think is going to be the K-State run game, because Cincinnati, even though they don't blitz a lot and they mainly are bringing 3, they are really well equipped to absorb what we're trying to do in the run game, and teams much worse equipped to stop us in the run game have been very effective.
So
yeah, so a guy like Dante Corleone there in the middle, when we are a primarily inside zone team, that really gives me some pause, I'll say. I'm not looking forward to how we do with that. I'm hopeful. I'm not necessarily expecting, but I'm hopeful that last week was a bit of a wake-up call for the offensive play calling. As for why the past few games hadn't been, I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, I guess we'll never know. Who's to say?
But I'm hopeful that maybe this will be the week that gets the message across. But I think the biggest thing to look out for is how does K-State's run game adjust for Dante Corleone? Not how do they deal with him, how do they just avoid him and adjust and just accept that inside zone probably is not going to work much this week.
Yeah, no, because you're not running inside zone to much effectiveness against Dante Corleone. It's simply not going to happen. Sorry, try again next week. And actually don't, because it's not going to work against Iowa State either. But the main thing that I'm watching, I do think that the line play and Dante Corleone or Corleone is just a really, really, like, that's a good pick. The other thing that I would watch is actually just, can the K-State secondary tackle? Because the route tree, not too horribly diverse for the Cincinnati receivers. It's a lot of hitches, goes, and slants, which are traditionally, if you don't have freakishly athletic corners, those are difficult to defend, but they don't have those sharp in-breakers or sharp outbreakers that apparently cause K-State defensive backs to have the studs in their cleats magically disappear. So I think that it's going to be a battle between, I really think that the game is going to come down to the defensive line versus K-State's offensive line, and then K-State's defensive backs up against Cincinnati's wide receivers, which, as much as I've sort of sauced on the defensive backs the past few weeks, and I'm not taking it back, they deserved it. I think that this is one of those games that specifically VJ Payne and Marquise Siegel are uniquely equipped to handle, where they have those, just tackle the guy in space. This is, God help me, this is a game where Jack Fabris would be a very, very, very good choice at safety. If I do see him lining up at center field, again, I will lose my mind, but he's not a bad pick for either the strong or Jack safety spot for this particular game. But Connor, do you have any thoughts about that before we get into offensive and defensive MVP projections?
I think that those are solid points. The defense, I think, despite a pretty difficult first half and some for the defensive backs in particular, I think the big thing for them was giving up on plays in just critical moments. But something I'm really hoping for with the defense this week is that they get dealt a better deal with field position, because they've really gotten the short end of the stick, not just the past few games, but really the entire season on field position. And that's really, I think, maybe put them under a bit of a microscope that they don't necessarily deserve. Now, not to say that they haven't had their flaws and their really bad moments.
Because they have.
They've definitely had them, and they have had some particularly terrible moments. But otherwise, they have done a pretty solid job, kind of honestly, in classic Klanderman fashion, later in seasons, finding ways to lock it down in the second half, and really give the offense chances. So I'm hopeful that we can see a more complete performance from the defense, but some of that also is going to come from the offense being able to sustain drives or get a punt off or be able to properly snap and hold a kick. Sorry, I shouldn't put that one on the offense. That's so.
You had to work it in there at some point somehow, and it's a fair point. But Connor, you can have offensive MVPs first this week.
Man, it's tough to pick somebody.
Yeah, you got an embarrassment of riches there, don't you? You got an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah. I think it has to be Avery Johnson. We saw Kleiman make some statements to the media this week where he said he encouraged Connor Riley to cut Avery loose in the run game, and I saw some people getting upset with the wording of that. I think they call that coach speak in the biz. I think Kleiman was probably a little red in the face while kindly and gently encouraging him.
Firmly grasp it.
Yeah, firmly grasp it. But it has to be Avery, I think, this week, because at this point, I really am and believe it when I see it mode with the run game. DJ still finished with a great stat line against Arizona State, but a lot of that was on the back of 2 big runs where he did a lot of the work. And the rest of the time, there was just nothing there for him. But the pass game, if we're able to keep it quick and simple, I think could be potentially really effective. We saw at the tail end of the game against Arizona State, kind of a formula that seemed to work a little better. So I think it has to be Avery.
Yeah, I think Avery's the obvious choice, because especially with Dylan Edwards dinged up, Keegan Johnson dinged up, the only other guys that I see that create a lot of matchup problems up against the Cincinnati defense are Trey Spivey, which God knows how much he's going to play, even though he's probably earned at least wide receiver 2 snap counts. But Jace is a good route runner, but may not be the best up against this particular 3-3 scheme. DJ would be a really, really good pick if the running game wasn't going up against Corleone. And yes, I know we keep mentioning him, and it's technically not just him, but it's mostly him. So I'm actually just going to steal your pick for Avery Johnson, because this is especially to the point of the season where if your quarterback's not going to have an amazing night, you're just not going to have a good night at all. So for me, my defensive MVP pick is really easy. It's going to be Marquise Siegel. And the reason I picked Siegel is because some safety is going to have to start playing a lot more box roll and going to have to come downhill in order to tackle a lot of those more efficient hitch passes. And I think that although VJ Payne is really, really good at that, Marquise Siegel is just on a completely different level when it comes with it. And, when he's not tripping, he's actually really, really good in coverage. And honestly, at this point, I'm not even sure I blame him for tripping. I think it's just cosmic at this point.
Yeah, I don't know what it was last week. It's been several days, and I still will think about that and feel kind of annoyed. And I don't, man, I don't understand how that happens so many times. But Siegel's a great pick. I'm going to roll with VJ Payne for similar reasons. We need a safety to step up, and I think to be really blunt, right now he's the other good safety, and we can't really rely super heavily on any of the others right now because they're either not quite there yet or they're just a little too inconsistent. Coley McAllister's probably the closest. It's telling that he has taken Jordan Riley's starting spot. Thank goodness. And but he's still not quite there, I think, to pick as the MVP. But he's getting there. He's getting there, and I've been reasonably pleased with how he's been playing, particularly compared to how Jordan Riley was playing. But I'm rolling with VJ Payne here. I think he led the team in tackles last week, and he also had a near interception, which I don't, despite it hitting him in the chest, I really don't blame him for it because it went right through the hands of a receiver. Like, it should have been a catch, and it wasn't. And so it should have been a pick, but it's easy to say that when it's in slow-mo. And I know I don't have the reaction time for that, so I'm not going to get on BJ's case for that, but I'm picking BJ Payne.
You want a wild card for defensive MVP?
Damian Ilalio.
Well, I wasn't going to be the what. That is a pretty decent wild card, but I was actually going to go Van Wy.
Oh, that is a good one. Lanky linebacker filling the slant window.
Yep.
I gave that some thought, but I can't remember where I saw it, but I saw a stat that said that Purnell Romaine and Moore have played like 96% of our linebacker snaps in like the last 3 weeks or something like that. And Van Wy has taken the other 4% and nobody else has played. So
that's what makes him a wild card. Like schematically, he's probably the best fit for this game and this game in particular.
The Van wild card.
Yeah. All right. So Connor, it's time. K-State wins if, K-State loses if, and your official projection.
K-State wins this game if, well, there's a lot of things you could say. I suppose I'll settle on an easy one. K-State wins this game if Connor Riley calls a complete game. I know that's really simple, but I mean, even in the Arizona State game, I know people don't really want to hear it, but he did have a couple of moments or a few sequences where things looked solid, like particularly late in the game. He was putting together some solid passing concepts that worked to Avery's strengths, but he just couldn't put it together consistently. If this week he is able to finally kind of harness those good moments and keep them on a roll and not try and outsmart himself, then I think that K-State can win this one. But K-State's going to lose this game if they're stubborn in the run game. And your guess is as good as mine on that. I'm Aaron Eckhart Two-Face with flipping a coin here. Heads I win, tails you lose. But I really don't know what to expect with that. But K-State's going to lose this game if we try running directly into Dante Corleone's face like 20 times and don't adjust until mid-third quarter. So
call it.
I don't want to.
Call it.
What do I stand to lose? No country for old men.
But K-State wins this game if they're able to stay plus in the turnover margin and they're able to get at least a few explosive plays. I'm not even really asking for them to out-explosive play Cincinnati. They just need a few of them because I think the defense is going to be able to do their part, especially in the red zone, to force field goals from a Cincinnati offense that is only scoring touchdowns on about half of their red zone possessions. So I think the defense is more than capable of keeping K-State into this game, provided or not even keeping them into the game, but, giving them the opportunity to win. May have said the quiet part out loud, which is that's going to be the K-State loses if, but I do have a lot of faith in the K-State defense, despite the warts that they've had in the past few weeks. A lot of that has been coming down to getting really, really poor field position. And that's where the K-State loses if comes in. K-State's going to lose this game if not only do they let Cincinnati keep efficient, if Brendan Sorsby isn't really pushed to hold on to the ball for more than a few seconds, if the K-State defense isn't doing a good job of disguising or getting in receivers' faces and Sorsby's just able to operate, that's the losing formula for the defense. And the losing formula for the offense is running it up the middle stubbornly every single drive at least once. You can put it, this has to be one of those weeks where the inside running game is the counterpunch to either a lot of screens, a lot of outside zone, a lot of counter, even some tosses. The inside game has to be the counterpunch. It cannot be the primary part of this offense. If it is, that's how K-State gets their backs blown out by Cincinnati. And now we're at the time where it's prediction time. And remember how I said that this game is a coin flip? I still genuinely believe that. And there's really bad news about projecting a coin flip. There's a 50% chance that you're wrong. As we've seen in No Country for Old Men, there's a 50% chance you're wrong. And when you're wrong, things don't go your way. But this is going to have to be a defensive game for K-State. I think that this game is going to be miserable for a lot of it. I'm going to be completely honest, and I think it's going to be a race to like 20. I do have K-State winning the race to 20 by, kicking a field goal or kicking 2 field goals or 3. We'll say that K-State wins 21-13 in favor of the good guys. But again, the coin flip is a very brutal system.
I've got K-State 24-20 in this one. I don't have any justification, but
you just want it to be true.
I need it to be true. It's either that or we just pretend that this team doesn't exist anymore, and we exclusively cover women's basketball because the K-State men play with their food against the worst team in the country. So
it's been a great couple of weeks outside of women's basketball, has it?
Women are carrying the team, man. They're carrying the whole athletic department right now. We need to get a Yoko Lee out there at tight end or something. I don't know.
I don't want no her
knees. She will lose what little ligaments and tendons she has remaining in her knees. But I think we can get her touchdown. So.
The Serena Sundell wide receiver 1 era has begun.
Who says no?
We putting Taryn at running back.
Yeah, actually, we are going to do that. So,
Jalen's obviously a corner. She's obviously CB1. She can have Garber's spot right now.
I see no downgrade. So,
vibes are awful. I will not lie. The vibes are atrocious.
I'm still have to predict the K-State win because if nothing else, despite me telling the truth on how I feel and all of that being just intensely negative on a degree that we've rarely ever seen on this show. I think we were more positive at the tail end of Bruce's era.
Oh my God.
Than how we're now. But at the end of the day, my heart of hearts, I am still an optimist. If for no other reason than for my own mental health and my own ensured safety in the future. It's difficult for me to predict the Cats L, even though I have done it before. I don't think K-State loses this game, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
The only L's we predicted in the time of doing the show was Alabama and the Sugar Bowl and Texas twice.
I predicted K-State to lose to OU in 22, and we won that game.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because OU was the other one, because we both projected losing because we're coming off the Tulane game.
Yeah, which that was a fair projection, I think. I'm trying to think about if I projected any others. I think if I remember in our first year doing the show, OU 21, we had no idea who the quarterback was going to be. Mm-hmm. So we had different projections based on who was QB. So I think we had Skyler was QB, we'd win. I think we had losses for Will and Jaron.
Jaron.
Yeah. Man who got meaningful snaps at K-State is third stringer at Kent State. Very telling, I think. Well, was. I don't think he's playing football anymore.
Oh, my God. Anyway, you have any follow notes before we let this episode rest?
No.
All right, if that's the case, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. If you want to follow or contact the show, you can follow us just about anywhere at Aggieville Alleycats. And if you want to email us, we're AggieVilleAlleycats@gmail.com. If you want to follow us on a more personal note, I am at AC Edwards00.
I am at Connor Boutsor, capital C, capital B.
And if you want to support the show financially, please be sure to check out the official Aggieville Alleycats merch store and the supporters link, both found in our podcast and Twitter bios. But most importantly, thank you all for listening to this episode of the Aggieville Alleycats podcast. Where come rain, shine, or anything in between, we're here to deliver to you the Kansas State sporting news that you so love. Stay safe, Alleycats.